Good morning. Welcome to today's Wampum Renewal ceremony. My name is Philip Lovejoy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harvard Alumni Association. The HAA is honored to co-host the ceremony with Native American alumni at Harvard University, one of the recipients of the 2022 HAA Clubs and Shared Interest Group Outstanding Alumni Community Award. This award recognizes a Harvard Club or Shared Interest Group that has gone above and beyond the call of duty to make an exceptional contribution within alumni community. And today's ceremony is no exception. I would also like to acknowledge members of the Harvard Black Alumni Society and the Harvard Club of Seattle, whose generous contributions have made this ceremony a reality today. A brief housekeeping note before we begin today's program. We ask that you silence all devices at this time. I know those of you on the board were told to do that before you left the meeting. And that no photography or videos be taken during the program. Thank you. From its origins, our Harvard alumni community has been anchored and enriched by Native and Indigenous peoples from across the Americas and around the world. The land on which Harvard is situated has been a place of learning for millennia, where Native and Indigenous peoples have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the place in which we meet, the people of the Massachusett tribe and their elders, past, present, and emerging, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusett people. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the Nipmuc and Wampanoag peoples, with whom Harvard has a long historical relationship. And I acknowledge and pay my respects to all other Native and Indigenous elders who are here today. Today we are honored to engage in ceremony with and to learn from alumni and community members of 7 New England Indigenous communities impacted by legacies of Indigenous slavery and colonialism. The history of their communities has intersected with that of Harvard University's through the Harvard University Charter of 1650, which calls for the education of English and Indian youth in knowledge and in godliness, and through the enslavement of their citizens and land dispossession. In the next hour, we will hear from citizens of the Maliseet tribe, the Massachusett tribe at Wampanoag, the Massachusett Pequot tribal nation, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, the Passamaquoddy tribe, the St. David's Islander and Native community in Bermuda, and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, Aquinnah. I will now turn the floor to Rakesh Khurana, the Danoff Dean of Harvard College.
Good morning, and thank you, Philip. It's an honor to be here with you today. My name is Rakesh Khurana. I'm the Danoff Dean of Harvard College. It's customary for me to often start with the mission of the college, so I'm just going to share a brief one because it connects, I think, to the work and the words that Philip just shared and part of our purpose here. So the mission of Harvard College has been for almost 4 centuries now to educate the citizens and citizen leaders for our society. It's a mission our college takes quite seriously. We helped educate some of the people who imagined this nation and its aspirations. Our students, our faculty, our staff were some of the people who helped lead the anti-slavery and abolition movements. Other than the 2 oldest military academies, no institution has more people awarded the Medal of Honor than Harvard College. And other than the 2 oldest military academies, no institution has given more lives in service to its nation than Harvard College. And this notion of service and service leadership runs through so many dimensions of our collective civic, economic, political, and intellectual lives. Trying to use knowledge to make the world a better place, to find voices that hadn't been heard in the past, to recover those voices so they can inform and shape us for a better future. And as Philip says, like our own society, there's a great deal we're proud of, but as the Legacy of Slavery report made clear this past year, as we recognize the sort of unfulfilled promise of Harvard, like our own nation, there's a recognition that Harvard has not been as inclusive as it should have been and still could be. So we know that our aspirations run ahead of our reality. But we do this through our fundamental belief in the transformative power of a liberal arts and sciences education. It begins for us with what we call the intellectual transformation, new ways of knowing, new ways of understanding, all toward the goal of developing an independent mind, learning to think for ourselves, to question convention, to search for veritas, the truth, but recognize that the truth is not something easily attained. It has to be recovered, uncovered, discovered, dialogued about. And so it has to be approached with a great deal of humility. So much of what we once believed to be true turns out to be more contingent or complex or not even true at all. And so we embed that in a very diverse living and learning experience where students study alongside students who are different from them, come from different walks of life, have different identities, evolving identities, which we believe not only will deepen that intellectual transformation, but that sets the conditions for what we hope is a social transformation, a real understanding of what it means to be a community. That a community is not a collection of independent interests. The dialogue is not simply the exchange of claims and counterclaims, where students learn to see behind each other's eyes, to hear from another's perspective. And then through those experiences, we hope our students begin to answer some questions for themselves. Who am I? Who am I and who do I want to be? How do I relate to others and what can I learn from others? What are my gifts and talents and how can I best use them to serve the world? Our goal is not to answer those questions for our students, but to give them the experiences and the tools so they can live their way to their authentic answers. I'm very honored to be here with all of you today. My predecessor as Dean of Harvard College, Dick Gross, helped receive the wampum beads that we will be sharing today. I'm just really grateful to be here with so many wonderful alums from Harvard University's Native American program, alums who are representing so many traditions of our Indigenous communities. Each day, these beads continue to remain in the dean's office, which is really the sort of, where it is in the university hall, which is really the center of the university. And my office is honored to be a steward of these beads. They've remained in that place since the 350th anniversary when they were given. There are 35 beads, each representing 10 years in honor of the 350th anniversary of the Harvard Indian College. And I look at them daily. I'm often asked about them when people come to my office, and I'm really glad to bring them here this morning. Today's Wampum Renewal ceremony focusing on honoring Indigenous people who were enslaved at Harvard University, as Philip mentioned. This aligns directly with the recommendations from the Harvard Legacy of Slavery report, which I think you can see in your program. The recommendations are titled Honor, Engage, and Support Native Communities and Calls for Advancing a National Dialogue on the History and Legacy of Indigenous Slavery and Colonialism in the United States. We hope this ceremony will do just that. To begin the ceremony, Stacey Harris, MPP class of 15, citizen of the Mashpee, Wampanoag, will open the ceremony with prayer. And if you're able to, please stand during the prayer. A smudging of the wampum will then follow the prayer. Tobias, Vanderhoop, and Newell, Lewey will smudge the wampum. Tobias is the Vice President of Native American Alumni at Harvard University and the former chairman of the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, Aquinnah. Newell, Lewey is a citizen of the Passamaquoddy and Maliseet tribes. I will join Tobias and Newell and hold the wampum during the smudging ceremony. Please remain standing during the smudging of the wampum. And at this time, I will ask Stacey to lead us in prayer.
Which my grandfather and his father were brutally trained to not know how to speak and so weren't able to pass it along. It means hello, my relatives, and I would like to first and foremost honor our current and former heads of state in the room, who we are. This is a profound moment for me and for all of us to stand here with you. Michael Thomas, Massachusett, Pequot, Tribal Nation Elders Council Executive Assistant and former Chairman, thank you so much for being here. Tobias Vanderhoop, our former Chairman of Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead, and a deeply respected elder who cannot be here today, but was an absolutely critical member of our planning and our resolve to move forward in this good way. Elizabeth Solomon, Massachusett tribe at Wampanoag, would have loved to be here, and her doctor said she must stay home and heal. So we offer hands up, prayers up, and hopes for her rapid healing. and thanks for her leadership, as always. I would also like to honor our planning committee, from whom we will hear very soon. I intentionally said hello, all of my relatives, to our entire audience because I mean it. We are traveling together. We all come from hundreds of years of history, and as Harvard alumni, as Harvard members of the community, we are intentionally looking backward, having an unvarnished, truthful moment together to say what has happened, how our incredibly resilient New England tribes have experienced their partnership, their shared history with Harvard and with New England, so we can move forward in a good way and create a better tomorrow. I am so grateful to Dean Khurana for his amazing words before and during the ceremony. I completely agree that we need to honor our intergenerational learnings, teachings, and trauma, and walk away from the radical individualism that has formed this nation. So when I say welcome all my relatives, I say who are we together and who will we be when we listen to all the voices in this room and listen to those voices as they say, who do we need to consult with as we move forward to acknowledge the full legacy of slavery and how we can be in community together in a good way in the future. So my heart is racing because this is just such an incredible moment, and I really thank you for the chance to be here. I thank Dr. Judith Sanford-Harris as well for being our first speaker today. I couldn't possibly give you a proper introduction, so I'm not going to try, but one of her many roles is former Director of Educational Outreach and K-12 Programs at HMS's Office for Diversity and Inclusion and Community Partnership. I'd like to invite you to the stage and continue to teach me and all of us how to move forward in a good way.
Wanikisak, Natasuis Judith Sanford-Harris, Kahwonk Natasuis Wachanainan. Namasumasa Maliseet, Nanikonsaman Akta Clan, Wampanoag, As Natayanian. Good day, I'm Judith Sanford-Harris, and I'm also called Caring One. My grandfather was from Mashpee. We are Deer Clan, my daughter and I, Stacey. We are Wampanoag. We are still here. And just if you're wondering about these two chairs, they represent Titus and Lucy. First, I want to thank the HAA for making us feel welcome over the years. Jack Reardon, Paul Finnegan, and Philip Lovejoy have been wonderful friends and allies. Thank you also to our adopted cousin, brother, nephew, Dr. Patrick Johansson, who is to us what William Apis was to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe in the 1830s. I'll talk about Reverend Apis in a moment, but I'd like to think that Patrick channels William Apis in his work, Making Good Trouble. As you'll hear from other presenters, Harvard was complicit in the subjugation of Indigenous peoples in New England in many ways. You'll hear about the Indian College, the Eliot Bible, and other events in the 1600s. So I'm just going to give you a few quick points from the 1700s to lay some groundwork for something that happened in Mashpee, the Mashpee Riot of 1834. Riot. In 1716, the Williams Fund was established through a bequest to Harvard to support missionary work and the funding of ministers sent to Mashpee. In the mid-1700s, the Massachusett state legislature decided that the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and other area tribes needed guardians and overseers because, of course, they weren't capable of governing themselves after more than 10,000 years of doing so successfully. The appointed guardians tended to guard matters in a way that worked in their favor. In 1780, my 5 times great-grandfather, Stacey's 6 times great-grandfather, Solomon Adequin, fought in the Revolutionary War on the side of the colonies. Of the 70 men from Mashpee who fought, there are accounts that only 10 survived. Other accounts say only 2. Our ancestor was one of the lucky ones. So now we jump ahead to the Mashpee Revolt, or riot, of 1834. Harvard sent a missionary minister, Phineas Fish, class of 1807, to the Mashpee plantation as one of the Mashpee guardians. He replaced the missionary Gideon Hawley in 1811 and was paid by the Williams Fund, which still exists today. Reverend Fish sold trees to white settlers from acres of land that were held in common by the tribe in order to benefit himself, and he took over the tribe's meeting house to preach only to the white settlers. The Mashpee folks, the Mashpee Wampanoag folks, had to either pray outside with, if you've heard of Blind Joe Amos, he was a Mashpee Wampanoag minister. So they either had to meet outside in the elements or in someone's home. William Apis, a Pequot minister, had heard about the Mashpee community and traveled from Connecticut to learn more. He was extremely politically savvy, and according to one of Phineas Fish's letters to Harvard's president, John Kirkland, Reverend Apis lectured the Mashpee citizens about the civil and religious rights of Indians. Fish told Apis not to say anything about oppression because the Mashpee tribal members might feel discontented, and they had quite liberty enough. The tribe voted to adopt William Apis, and together they wrote quite a few letters and petitions to the state legislature and Harvard University, requesting the removal of Fish and also requesting support for access to their meeting house and the safeguarding of their trees. My 4 times great-grandfather, Ezra Adequin, was a member of the tribal council and a selectman, along with Isaac Coombs, descendant of Joel Aya Coombs, class of 1665. A petition signed by 101 women and men, including William Apis and a number of our Adequin and Peters relatives, where's Jim Peters? There you are, stated that they would no longer allow any white man to come upon the plantation to cut or carry off wood or hay after July 1. On July 1, Reverend Apis and several tribal members came upon 2 white men who were loading their carts with timber from the commonly held tribal woodlands. The men had ignored signs posted by the tribe. Apis instructed the Mashpee men to unload the wood, and while they did nothing to harm the white settlers, the colonial government arrested and charged Apis and the other Native men with native rebellion against the state, riot, assault, and trespass. Reverend Apis and the selectmen appealed to the legislature. The tribe appealed to a broader audience, comparing their actions to the Boston Tea Party. A law was passed stating that missionaries could basically do as they wished with their meeting houses and the land around them. Reverend Phineas Fish was not recalled by Harvard until 1840, after 29 contentious years. Through grit and perseverance, As Nathaniel, we are still here. But today is also about Harvard and slavery. The slavery report mentions, and I quote, a steadfast commitment to truth and to repair. So what would repair mean to me? First of all, slavery is slavery. The statement in the report that the experiences of Black and Indigenous descendants of slavery are distinct, and then splitting the 2 apart for separate study, strikes me as being separate and unequal. The full weight of the committee's efforts should be focused on both together. Inclusion and representation have been issues since the plaque that you see in the program was first commemorated by Drew Faust in 2016. There were no Indigenous leaders invited to that event, and there were none on the 2022 Slavery Study Committee that we could identify. Inclusion and representation should be integral facets of everything the university does from here on. Representation of our tribes on the implementation committee, task forces, etc. Repair to me begins with university-wide buy-in and participation. every school, every department. We can list individuals across the university who have taken it upon themselves over the years to create wonderful programs and provide resources to individual tribes, usually with grant funds. But every school should develop programs and services in collaboration with area tribes and with institutional, not grant funds. The university has a very healthy endowment. Meanwhile, the tribes struggle and take on debt to provide for their citizens. There was a committee established several years ago out of the provost's office at our request, but when the provost could find only 10 minutes in his schedule to give to the meeting and the tribal chairpeople in attendance, we understood clearly that there was no real commitment to working with us. If Harvard is to live up to its charter and work toward the education of English and Indian youth, these efforts must be coordinated at the top by the president and provost and must be university-wide.
And now it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce Michael Thomas, again, our Massachusett Pequot Tribal Nation Elders Council Executive Assistant and former Chairman of Massachusett Pequot Tribal Nation. Thank you so much again for being here.
Waikisak, Utasawis Kwasakwa. My English name is Michael Thomas. Kwasakwa is the name given to me by my elders, and I am happy to be here with you today once again, although it was many years and several pounds ago, the last time I have come to see Harvard folks and share thoughts. I want to start with acknowledging my elders in the room and seeing more than one who have been role models to me and many other folks, inspiring us to try to do that for the younger people that come behind us. And so I'm here to share my people's perspective on this slavery legacy report and recommendations. When I was asked by a few elders to summarize my thoughts about the report after they knew I had digested it and calmed down, I said to them that I thought it represented new and heartbreaking details about things they already knew. It was the only appropriate way for me to frame it. And then I proceeded to share some of those heartbreaking details. It's important that we understand that the dehumanization of our people that is reflected within the body of what has been researched is a foundational piece of how our people have always been treated. It's also important to acknowledge the wisdom of our elders as the world's most educated people start to catch up to their wisdom. And so my elders in the 50s and the 60s who talked about the fact that all things and all people are created in connection with one another. All of us have relationships in this room. And all of us as Native people are defined by those relationships. Our entire view of the world is defined by those relationships. And so one heartwarming piece of the recommendations is the inclination that genuine relationships with New England tribes, certainly not limited to Mashantucket Pequot people, would be sought and established by Harvard. And I can only hope that that comes to fruition, because truth is only the first step down the path to reconciliation. A little later, I'll talk about additional steps from our Pequot point of view. It's important that we understand that the residual impacts of the content in this report still impact us today deeply. Impact Native American communities, impact African American communities in ways that are simply not well supported in America. And so hopefully this will bring some special and specific attention to the intergenerational impacts of slavery as well as colonialism. And so we can actually, through these collaborative efforts, bring a greater sense of honor to our own country, because we have become the world's police, going all over to tell people not to do it the way it was specifically done here, threatening people with military might if they take the same steps that my ancestors watched as their people and lands and cultures were robbed from their grandchildren. And so the suppression of these truths at Harvard for such a long period of time deserves mention, because that suppression is indicative of the systemic racism that my people have lived with for hundreds and hundreds of years here, and that fine academic institutions like this are still debating about the very existence of, which is baffling to us. If you can read this report and acknowledge the truth within it, and still look in the mirror and believe that systemic racism is not an inherent part of our country, I don't know what will reach you. I don't know what will convince you. And the reality is we all have biases, even Native American people. We don't have very much power to do actions that reflect our biases. Today we're struggling for survival. And so the biases of folks in power are always deserving of more attention, because self-examination for groups in power, whether that is intellectual or political or social power, is a rare thing. Self-awareness in an American culture that loves to pathologize the other and avoid the mirror is also an inherent part of our country. And so America is a great place. The secret to follow on to that point is it has always been a great place. Having conversations like this can lead to real change, and we hope that there is a greater sense of inclusion moving forward to create that real change, because we would have loved to be more involved with the development of this report as Massachusett Pequot people. We would love to be more involved with the planning of this landmark conference that is referred to in the report. We would love to host a portion of that conference at the Massachusett Pequot Museum and Research Center. We would love to have Harvard financial and technical support to create a permanent exhibit on New England slavery in the Massachusett Pequot Museum and Research Center. And so there are many important things that we could do together if the commitment to reconciliation extends up to the highest levels in this institution, and if it's inclusive enough of New England woodland peoples. And so I'm glad that Newell and others are in here from sister tribes. The connections between us are not well understood by Harvard or by America in general. You should know, in relation to Newell's participation, there would not be a tribal economy in Massachusett if it were not for our Passamaquoddy and Penobscot relatives specifically. We also received a significant amount of help from our Seminole relatives in Florida. And these are all things before Foxwoods was even conceived of. And so the connections between us call for the kind of inclusion that we practice, and that is what we suggest be embraced by Harvard. There are many, many things that Harvard can do to honor, engage, and support Native communities, as this report indicates it wishes to do. The number one thing on that list, and this is a rare instance when I can speak for all of my tribal relatives standing in front of me, sitting in front of me. The return of our ancestors' remains, currently held at the Peabody, must be the cornerstone of any real, sincere relationship between Harvard and New England woodland natives specifically, but Native people all over North America and probably from other continents as well, knowing the scope of the Peabody. And so we are all connected, and we talk to one another when we get the opportunity to do that. And it would resonate throughout the indigenous world if this priority of ours became a starting point for meaningful relationships with Native communities. In the absence of paying attention to this highest priority of ours, I don't know how meaningful those relationships can ever be, to be honest with you. But that being said, there are other ways that Harvard could help to fill the gap that has been created by some of this ugly history within our people, within our families, within our communities. And so tribal community capacity building should be a focus of Harvard moving forward if these relationships are going to be meaningful. We are structurally and legally hampered in tribal communities. And so we really can't, without the help of outsiders, sadly enough, protect the social, cultural, and economic well-being of our own people. And so our language reclamation efforts are a classic example. The only institution that I'm aware of that has paid occasional attention to this priority of ours is MIT. It would be wonderful to see Harvard lean into language reclamation among our people. These languages were not lost. These languages were stolen. And it's important that we all understand and acknowledge the truth in that regard. After the Pequot massacre, which happened in the year of Harvard's founding, my people were forbidden to speak our language. There were public executions in Connecticut of folks who spoke a Pequot word or identified themselves even as being Pequot people. That is difficult history to overcome if people pretend it never happened. And that's pretty much the approach to teaching history in Connecticut classrooms today. Harvard could obviously be a major, major force for just honoring the truth about the history that has occurred. Our tribal economies could be strongly supported by this institution. And I'm not talking just about financial contributions, but actual capacity building and actual resource conservation and development. Our people are our greatest resource, but we have many great resources, and we need capacity to conserve and develop these. Harvard could help there in a really important way. Nonprofit organizations on a community level. One of the mistakes institutions like Harvard make when they reach out to Indian people is to only talk to those of us who are in leadership. That's no way to reach a tribal community. If you're only talking to a tribal council, we're happy because, frankly, you avoided the American predisposition to simply ignoring our existence altogether. But that's not enough to say you want a relationship with a tribe of people. We don't do the command and control thing. You meet MT and you don't need to meet any other Pequot. No, no, no. That's not the way we work. And so it leads me back to the process for this reconciliation that is written about and I hope at some point will be realized. Truth is the first step down the path toward that reconciliation. Mutual respect is the second step. And it's why I start with the return of our ancestors as the basis for mutual respect. Cultural understanding would be a third step, cultural intelligence perhaps on top of that. And then we can get to mutual support in the fourth stage. There is no other path to reconciliation. And so my last urging for Harvard as an institution would be not to commit the typical American mistake of assuming that you can jump right from a 5-minute acknowledgement of half a millennium of truth to reconciliation. It's not the way relationships work, not the way reconciliation works. And so youth development and education would be another area where, frankly, we're already using some of your stuff. In my tribal community, your resilience work from the Center on the Developing Child here, we're using it. And plenty of other things that you've produced here, we're using, but with no contact academically with Harvard whatsoever, just because you happen to produce what we think is pretty good stuff in many areas. It would be wonderful to actually have Harvard attached to our use of material from the Center for the Developing Child. Trauma-informed environments are essential for our people. And we don't even have a great trauma education approach ourselves for Indian country in communities that are entirely impacted by intergenerational trauma as well as the kind of trauma that we face in our daily lives. And so helping us to teach our own people about the impacts of trauma upon us is another area where Harvard could make significant contributions to Native communities. You have trauma-informed environments here in this state for all of your children, and God bless Massachusetts for that one. For us, obviously, it's more important, but you all know here that in trauma-informed school environments, academic and social indicators are promising for kids who are not impacted by trauma, much less the ones who are more deeply assisted by this kind of approach, who are trauma impacted. And so, sadly enough, we in Connecticut don't have a whole lot of traction under trauma-informed environments in schools. There are 3 states in the union that require it. Yours is one of them. Wisconsin and Washington State are the other 2. We would love to see Connecticut join that. We've been to Hartford to fruitlessly speak into microphones about this need. I bet they'd pay a hell of a lot more attention to Harvard if you were talking about what has already been proven here and in Wisconsin and in Washington State. And so not only could you be a part of the reconciliation that is written about, but you could actually help other people move toward reconciliation with us. So there's a magnifier effect we would ask you to embrace as a higher education institution. And so I'm happy to see the institutional steps toward Veritas being a reality. But that is only the first step. We look forward to full engagement with you as we hopefully take the remaining steps together. Katapatimu.
Thank you so much. I believe I can probably say for all of us, we all came to Harvard to begin with to learn, and I've already learned a lot today. I know we'll continue to learn a lot as we hear from St. Clair Brinkworth Brinky Tucker, who is an esteemed elder and author of St. David's Islanders and Native Community in Bermuda. I'd like to invite you to the stage.
Good morning to you all. Greetings to you all. My name is St. Clair Brinky Tucker. I'm a former chairman of the St. David's Island Reconnection Committee that was established in 2002 to help St. David's Islands to reconnect with their Native American heritage. I am now a trustee of the St. David's Islanders and Native Community, a registered Bermuda charity, which was established in 2008. We are very proud of our accomplishments thus far. The information I'm about to share with you today is a result of many hours of researching old wills in Bermuda government archives, read many books on the slave trade in Bermuda, heard old stories, traditions shared by many elders from St. David's Island, including my own mother. There is documented evidence of several shipments of Native Americans from New York area, New England area, from Spanish-controlled areas in the Caribbean and South America being brought to Bermuda. Archive records state that the first Indian arrived in Bermuda in 1616 on a ship called the Edwin. It was assumed that he and others came from the West Indies to die for pearls. None were found, and he and others left with the captain/master. And in 1644, a shipment containing a group of Native Americans from tribes from Staten Island, Long Island, Connecticut areas were captured from fights with the Dutch colonialists. The captured Indians were said to be Mohegans. Shortly after the Pequot War in 1637, Massachusett Governor Winthrop sent many captured Indian prisoners to Bermuda to be sold as slaves. Another shipment of natives from the Wampanoag tribe in New England was sent to Bermuda, and they were prisoners of war from the King Philip War 1675/1676. Vanderhoop Mason, in his article called Bermuda Pequots in the Harvard Alumni magazine in 1937, states that up to 40 to 50 Wampanoag Indians were sent to Bermuda. In reviewing a collection of 488 wills recorded from 1655 to 1777, 47 list Indians as part of the inventory. This calculated to be about 105 Indians. Of the 47 wills, only 9 had Indians only. 2 of these 9 were located in the eastern part of the island. Although they made a small part of the workforce, evidence still suggests natives were preferred servants. They were promptly used as domestic work, farming, fishing, and crew on ships. It was thought that records such as these may have been able to helped us to trace our lineage. Prior to emancipation in 1834, the Bermuda government conducted 3 censuses, the first in 1622. They were listed as 5 race categories: white, Negro, Indian, mulattoes, mestiz. The second was in the mid-1700s, and they classified Indians, mulattoes, and mestiz as colored. And then in the third census, in the late 1700s, classified Indians as Negroes. To help control the slave population, in the late 1600s, the Bermuda government passed an act forbidding Indians to dance or speak their native language. The masters called their culture witchcraft. If a native was convicted, the woman was bound hand and foot and thrown overboard, while the men were hung. When convicted of a crime, the outlook was grim. There were no jails. The governor was the judge. There were no juries, no court of appeals. The prescribed manner of punishment of death was usually hanging. In St. Peter's Anglican Church in St. George's, Bermuda, and it is the oldest Anglican church outside the British Isles, and the oldest Protestant church in continuous use in the New World. And they played a major role in running of the island and dealing with slaves. There are balconies which are still in place today, where the slaves were instructed to sit while their masters worshiped. Now, whites even had a separate graveyard. They were buried with their heads facing west, while the whites were buried with their heads facing east. Slave owners, free whites, and even clergy members strongly felt if there was a coming of Christ, the whites would see him first and they would go to heaven. The others would not see him coming, and they would go to hell. In 1776, a Wampanoag Indian slave named Indian John strongly objected to being enslaved and devised a plan to kill his master and family. The slave lived close to the middle of the island, an area called Flats. His plan was to break into his master's house at night, steal his gun, go outside, fire a shot in the air. His goal was to shoot his master and family when they ran outside to investigate. Everything worked as planned until the gun misfired. He was instantly apprehended and prosecuted. Immediately after hearing, he was quartered on a small island not far from his master's residence. Many Indians were forced to witness this event as to be a deterrent. There are many stories told of the Wampanoag sachem's wife and son being enslaved in Bermuda. The son was kept on St. David's Island, and his mother in Hamilton Parish, about 3 miles from St. David's Island. Another interesting fact was discovered during our first powwow in 2002. We discovered that the St. David's Island fishermen made their fish nets with the same identical knot as the Narragansett tribe. Many St. David's Islands have done their genealogy with. Most of them are blood related. They are very proud of their heritage. This is something no one can ever take away. In fact, we know of a family in Somerset, that's the western end of the island, who has done extensive genealogy research and has traced her family to the Wampanoag female Indian slave and her master. There's one last story I would like to share with you. My time is limited. When all the slaves were given their freedom in 1834, the Indians were able to get and drink too much alcohol. British soldiers that were stationed on St. David's Island at the time reported they drank too much, were very loud and out of control. They were acting like hooligans. They were acting like Mohawks. This term was meant to be derogatory and demeaning. Mohawks had a reputation of being a very large and fearless tribe towards people that didn't look like them. Eventually, people of St. David's Island proudly thought they were descendants of the Mohawk tribe. It grew into a badge of honor to St. David's Islanders, so much so when the committee proved to St. David's Islanders Mohawks were never enslaved in Bermuda. Many would not accept it. In fact, my dear mother passed away in 2002, and she said to me near the end, "Child, I was born a Mohawk, I'm going to die a Mohawk." During July of this year, the St. David's Islands and Native community was honored by the Bermuda government with first-day stamp covers in honor of our existence for 20 years and educating Bermudians about their Native American heritage. At this time, I would like to thank the committee who organized this event and for inviting me to participate. I am deeply honored to be here and very grateful to be allowed to share some information about Indian slave history in Bermuda. This has been a wonderful journey. St. David's Islands and Native communities' next powwow is scheduled for early June 2003. You're all welcome to come regardless of belonging to a tribe or not. I will close with simply stating our community's motto. It's not about your tribe, it's about your heritage. Oh.
Thank you so much. It is that we are deeply honored, and thank you for traveling all the way from Bermuda, braving the cold, to educate all of us. And I look forward to reading your book. As leader to leader, and as people walking forward together, I have been so grateful and so lucky to literally be sitting elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder with Tobias Vanderhoop, who has given me new hope and great support as vice president, and whom I hope someday to support as president, but we'll wait for him to actually agree. In the meantime, he is an ongoing leader storyteller, and truth teller. So I am in the spirit of truth is only the first step down the path towards reconciliation. I invite all of us to listen attentively to Tobias's important truth.
Wanima Tampan, Natasuis Tobias Vanderhoop, Nutoma Sakunat. Katabatanamu to the Harvard Alumni Association for hosting us today. I'm honored to participate in this Wampum Renewal ceremony, and I'm thankful that you've chosen to witness and support this important event. Wampum is a mnemonic device that, when used ceremonially, contains histories, treaties, pacts, and promises. History tells us that the adoption of the 1650 Harvard Charter brought new hope and focus to our beloved institution, with the declaration that Harvard's mission was dedicated to the education of English and Indian youth of this country in knowledge and godliness. With the charter came an infusion of financial support through the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in New England and other patrons interested in conversion and education of our native people. In the beginning, Harvard's mission and stated intention toward our people were upheld, if only briefly, as men from the region were brought to this area to receive education in preparation for their time at Harvard Indian College before attending. Unfortunately, the number of Native students accepted since that time has remained seriously low since those early days. In 2006, I was humbled to participate in the inaugural Wampum gifting ceremony, which used the still living culture and traditions of our people to invigorate the ties between us that were once so important to the continuation of this institution. On that day, we approached the ceremony with the memory of the first Native graduates, Caleb Chishatiamak and Joel Iacooms, both class of 1665, in our hearts. They represented my tribe's island community and at the beginning of this relationship between us, and paved the way for all of us who have sought the valued education of this institution since. This Wampum Renewal ceremony marks the first time that we have been able to reconvene during the Harvard Alumni Association meetings to tend to our responsibility to care for the Wampum. And on this day, there is more history that we must recite before it so that it can be contained and so that we can continue to bring it forward in the ceremonial way. There are generational traumas that our New England tribal communities continue to wrestle with, such as the diminishment of our territories through detrimental land transactions, our endeavors to return our ancestors' remains to our homelands, and there are many, many more. Today, we engage in this Wampum Renewal ceremony to begin to address the effects of Indigenous slavery and indenture on our people, and to honor the memory of the Indigenous people who were enslaved here at Harvard University. The release of the Presidential Committee on Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery report has brought forth a new acknowledgement of this difficult part of our history. The report immediately caused me to reflect on Titus, whom we acknowledge today with a chair to recognize his continued presence in our hearts, in our minds, and in this circle that we've created. Titus is one name that we must raise up here, but he is only one of the many who were brought to institutions like Harvard only to serve, or so many others forced to serve in homes, on estates, in businesses, and on whale ships that left ports all over New England. Slavery and indentured servitude had a greatly damaging effect on every tribal community for the reasons that I've already stated. And the time that I have here is not enough for me to truly convey the way that it affects each one of us who have stood before you and spoken today. Slavery and indentured servitude have affected me deeply in the way that I have approached the work that I've been asked to do most recently. I was asked to serve on the Legislative Slavery Conference Planning Committee, which has been tasked with implementing the recommendations regarding Indigenous slavery contained in the report. As I have thought through the effect of this subject on me, I can only describe it as mind-blowing. It is extremely difficult for me to think of how much I wanted to come and participate in the educational opportunities of this institution as the first male member of my tribe since the 1600s to come here and to graduate. And then, in turn, have to think about the effect that this institution participated in by bringing our people into slavery, into indenture. It's difficult to process, but I feel fortunate that I've been able to work through those feelings that I have, the anger that I have, the sorrow that I have, knowing that our children, our young people, our men and women were taken from our communities. And I work through that knowing that what I am able to do after having been asked to participate in that planning committee will allow us to begin to create a space so that the voices can be heard directly from our people, as you've begun to hear today, so that you can have some touch of understanding about how this affects us still after several hundred years. It isn't like several hundred years to the voices that you've already heard. And so, it is my true hope that first and foremost, Harvard will engage with the tribes directly and genuinely endeavor to hear the many voices of the people and the feelings that we carry regarding the issue of slavery and indentured servitude. That part of that process will include honestly incorporating our points of view on meaningful efforts to repair the relationship and move forward together in a healthy way to fulfill the stated mission of the 1650 Charter. That you will recruit more students from our tribal communities and offer support that will help ensure their successful completion, and that you will provide a space for our tribal communities to address our histories and speak the truth of the historical traumas that continue to affect us. And through those actions, show that the knowledge retained by our tribes and the continued existence of our tribes is honored, valued, respected by our beloved Harvard University. Ahapai, hon, katapatanamu.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanford-Harris, Michael Thomas, St. Clair Brinkworth, Tucker, and Tobias Vanderhoop for your teachings, for your ongoing learning so that you can continue to guide us. I will ask you all, if you are able, now to stand for our honoring song. Newell, Lewey, Passamaquoddy, and Maliseet tribe citizen will lead us.
Mois bazoe opsediwen, dolnabamog. Nolwyd Lewis, best katamuka nakabalasku awinil. Nagoji awzi baik, medak megog, naganegutgog. So I said good morning. And more. I just wanted to say my name is Newell, Lewey, and I just told you where I'm from. And those are the areas that my relatives are from, and I greeted you as relatives as well, right? We are all here together. And I just wanted to take a moment to say how grateful I am to Patrick and the committee, and I'm honored and to be here, and humbled as well. And I feel a little bit like, following Michael and Tobias and the others that, those are like, wow, they just wowed me. And I could sit here all day and listen to those stories and that history, and that's my passion, language and culture and history. And I taught that for a few semesters at the university level. And I was also going to say, I know this is honoring the Indigenous people that were enslaved here at Harvard. But as Michael pointed out, and I was going to mention myself, that there are relatives here now. Harvard. Our ancestors need and want to go home. Sorry, I get emotional when I think about all of that. They need and want to go home. And this honoring of those that were enslaved and those that are here, this honor song, in my language I say, Kchitpud Yodladawe Wagan. This is a very sacred song. Wallas weltamutinen, elishkijina wotie, dulna bamag, makwahatinen. Wallas weltamutinen, dan wena beksotie, dulna bamag, wujukem tutinen, wujukem tutinen, dan elipawadak, agisiulinakch, yod skit kamig. Away, oh, hey, hi, away, oh, hey, oh, hey, hi, away, 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 oh, hey, hi, hey, oh. Away, oh, hey, hi, away, oh, hey, oh, hey, hi, away, oh, hey, hi, away, oh, hey, hi. Chivalry.
Thank you so much. It was deeply moving, and I'm hoping our relatives nearby who will get to come home soon and could hear you in the meantime, welcoming them home. I know we're running over time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our next speaker. But just for a moment, I would like to acknowledge someone we won't have a chance to hear from directly today, but his follow-through, deeply respectful way of moving through the world and the trust he's built with everyone you've heard from today runs through this ceremony and has lifted us all up all along. So I would just like, if you will, join me in giving Patrick Johansson a brief hand for the amazing work he's done. So now it's my honor to introduce Jim Peters for closing remarks. Jim Peters is Mashpee Wampanoag, and among many other roles is Executive Director of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been quite a morning, hasn't it? Thank you, Harvard alumni, for having us here today, giving this opportunity, this audience, to talk about our journey. As you said, I'm Jim Peters, Executive Director of the Mass Commission on Indian Affairs. I'm also the son of Slow Turtle and Morning Star, and the great-great-grandson of Blind Joe Amos, who had much to do with Phineas Fish back in those days. I was born and raised on the Maliseet plantation in Cape Cod, a place where the Harvard missionaries propagated the gospel since the 1600s. You know, I would like to wish all of you happy eve of All Saints' Day, and how appropriate it is to call upon all of our relations to be witness to the testimonies of my sisters and brothers on this day of the Great Spirit, in the year of our Great Spirit, 12,022. We have been on a journey living in harmony with our mother, the earth, all of these millenniums. We are of the land is of us. As my people have described how these past 400 years have been the most difficult and how this institution played a significant role in our destitution, I must say slavery comes in many colors. Social and economic have been very effective. In my short lifetime, I was born into a pristine landscape with forests and wildlife, freshwater lakes and ponds. We drank the water and ate the fish. Our saltwater water bays, abundant with shellfish, eels, crabs, waterfowl, plants and herbs, medicines that provided for us, a Garden of Eden. A town that evolved from our tribal ways was run by our families. We held most of the jobs, fire, police, school. Our tribal communities maintained this domain. We lived in harmony with the land. As I grew older, I found out that our little town was bankrupt. The state was auctioning off our allotted lands because we couldn't pay the taxes or indebtedness that would incurred. There were no industries to generate consistent revenue except for the pristine land. They were determined to build a tax base. We filed the land claims case in 1976 to stop the indiscriminate development of our lands and found ourselves before an all-white jury to decide if we were a tribe to sue for our land. With an inconsistent jury decision, the judge ruled, you can be a tribe for what other purpose except for the return of your land. The consequences are too great. We were shunned for our actions and became powerless to stop the carnage. Over the past 50 years, the landscape and vital statistics changed dramatically. At one time, the fastest growing community in the country. Well, our land has become overdeveloped, and there are no more forests for our animals to breed. We can no longer swim or eat the fruits of our lakes and bays. They are polluted with septage. Our people have been economically displaced from our own land that was deeded to us by our sachems, true sovereigns of the time in 1658, never to be dissold or alienated unless we all agree, so that we'd always have a place to be. Since our land claims defeat, we pursued and attained federal recognition administratively, and for the past 2 decades, maybe foolishly, we have chased economic development opportunities that may have changed the tides for us. We again found the white man's games deceitful. As we lobbied and financed gaming legislation in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, purchased land and lobbied to place it in federal trust, and are currently defending the Department of Interior's authority to keep our land in trust, challenged by one word, now, in the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act, a law that was legislated to rectify the thievery of millions of Indian acres reaped by the Dawes Indian Allotment Act. Ironically, Dawes was a Massachusetts senator, and President Grover Cleveland, who signed the Allotment Act, had an estate in Bourne and frequented Mashpee for hunting and fishing. We are currently hundreds of millions in debt, while 3 other casinos have been built and are operating in Massachusetts. So here we are, 2022, pursuing our journey into a new millennium. Our challenges have been formidable. And as we assess the gains that we have endured, the terms "what if" is quite relevant. What if the white man's disease did not come across the Great Pond and devastate our people? What if we didn't show the Pilgrims how to plant corn? What if our Massachusett didn't sign that first treaty of mutual protection, providing 50 years without retaliation? What if the colonists had a different view of the world? In 1650, the Harvard Charter was adopted, declaring its mission to educate for education of the English and Indian youth of this country in knowledge and godliness, and the Society of the Propagation of the Gospel in New England agreed to stabilize Harvard financially in return for the commitment to convert and educate the Native Americans. What if Harvard missionaries sincerely lived up to its commitment to educate our people over the past 370 years? With education and understanding of America's ways, our praying towns may have progressed, made progressive with industrious and stable. We may not have ever been subject to indentured servitude, serving to a cheap labor. Our men would not have been forced into the whaling industry for years at a time. We would not have fought in all of your wars at great casualty to our people. We would have understood that Allotment Act was designed to destroy our traditional ways and expose our land to indebtedness and taxation, that the propagation of the gospel was more about fearing your God than becoming humans. There are other methods. These and other methods were perfected upon us and used on all of the indigenous people of this land. So here we are again, standing before you, direct descendants of those indigenous people that this institution committed to educate in knowledge and godliness 370 years ago. Since then, Harvard has become a renowned Ivy League institution, while our Native communities have been disenfranchised of their lands and subject to poverty and discrimination. Only a few have been able to maintain some sense of Native cultural integrity, and we would like to call upon your institution to fulfill its covenants of your charter, to provide educational opportunities for our people at various levels of study, from elementary to graduate, to assist our tribal governments in areas of nation building, long-term planning, business development and investment, internships, mentorships, access and exposure to ideas and insights. For the past 400 years, this America has victimized all of the obstacles that stood in its way from exploiting the vast resources of this land to become one of the most powerful nations in the world. And you've gone too far. Our Mother Nature, our Mother of the Earth, resents the way that you have taken it and is retaliating. All of our children, yours and ours, are going to be faced with many challenges to comprehend and attempt to rectify the damage that has been done. There should be fear and concern for their future. Help us, them, to prepare for a brave new world. Thank you. Well, I almost feel as that reading things like that is, it's just, we think about how do we maximize our opportunity to talk to you. There are so many things that have happened to us over these years, and it's been difficult. It's been difficult to actually come to you and talk about the atrocities that have happened to us and the condition that our people are in today, and our struggles to try to provide opportunities for our kids to think about our next generations, all of us, what we have in store, and whether we're prepared to deal with that. And we're not. We need help. And your institution has done some interesting things. You've helped us in many ways and got in the way in many ways. And so we need to work together in the future, be able to talk to each other, be able to understand, what each of our issues are. So thank you. Look forward to our future.
So my strategy was for us to end on those just esteemed words, but I am grateful for the chance to say thank you for sharing this space with us today. We look forward to moving forward in a good way with you in open dialogue, ongoing dialogue. We recognize that any Wampum renewal ceremony, honoring song, community gathering, it is the beginning of a needed ongoing conversation and not an end in itself. So you've now heard from some very knowledgeable, esteemed leaders in our communities, and we would invite you to continue to speak with them, learn from them, ask how Harvard can help move us forward. So with that in mind, thank you so much again, and let's eat.